Organizations routinely base multi-million-dollar strategic decisions on quantitative data. They plot trajectories and allocate capital, assuming their data rests on a solid foundation. But at the point of collection, that foundation can shatter. The point of failure in this pipeline is often the exact mechanism used to collect the data, the questionnaire. A questionnaire is a precision scientific instrument. Every grammatical choice, punctuation mark, and sequence of logic directly dictates the mathematical validity of the final dataset. To see exactly how these instruments fail, we will forensically deconstruct a deeply flawed real-world survey attempt drafted for a firm called OCG Business Services, exposing its structural vulnerabilities. The linguistic architecture and the structural sequence of a questionnaire govern the reliability of its data output. Minor linguistic flaws at the micro level do not stay isolated. They compound, introducing systemic data contamination at the macro level. To generate usable data, a researcher must treat language and sequence as rigorous, calculable variables. We begin the diagnostic at the micro level, examining the precise phrasing of individual questions. Consider this double-barreled prompt. Do you think there is a good market for the product and that it will sell well? This forces simultaneous evaluation of market size and sales viability. The resulting ambiguity produces a useless data point, masking which half was actually answered. Leading questions introduce a different threat, known as social desirability bias. A prompt asking if employees deserve a raise in these days of escalating living costs ties the question directly to societal norms. It pressures the respondent to answer in a socially acceptable manner, completely masking their actual opinion of employee performance. Loaded questions represent a similar linguistic failure, relying on emotional manipulation rather than societal pressure. Asking an employee about vindictive management or a union strike inserts polarizing, emotionally charged words into the prompt. The resulting data measures the respondent's emotional reaction to those specific trigger words, not their rational assessment of the workplace. The next vulnerability comes from recall-dependent questions. Asking a 30-year employee to remember the exact month they started in a specific department introduces severe cognitive bias. Human memory degrades, and self-reported dates are highly unreliable. In these cases, objective records are the more reliable source. Relying on self-reporting for precise historical facts introduces a high margin of error that is easily avoided through administrative documentation. When these phrasing errors accumulate, linguistic contamination creates a false signal. The outputs look like legitimate data, but they are actually mathematical reflections of the researcher's own biased phrasing. Zooming out from individual words, the sequential order of the survey introduces its own structural risks. Long, repetitive question blocks trigger mechanical responding, with fatigued respondents providing identical answers straight down a single column. The solution is interspersing negatively worded questions, forcing the respondent to reverse their cognitive logic to agree with the new premise. This structural shift breaks the respondent's automatic rhythm. It also acts as a built-in mathematical test for internal consistency, allowing the researcher to detect and discard automated responses. To sequence the full document, researchers deploy the funnel approach. The funnel dictates the progression of difficulty. The instrument opens with general, low-effort questions and slowly narrows down into highly specific, complex inquiries. Easing the respondent into the process manages their cognitive load. If you place the hardest questions up front, the resulting friction causes early survey abandonment. This principle of minimizing friction also dictates the exact placement of classification data, specifically questions regarding demographics and income. Asking for a respondent's salary or marital status generates psychological resistance. These sensitive questions must be relegated to the absolute end of the instrument, ensuring bulk data is collected before any defensive reaction occurs. Successful questionnaire architecture relies on managing the respondent's psychological stamina and removing cognitive friction from the user experience. These mechanics become even more volatile when an instrument must cross geographic and linguistic boundaries. Translating a survey requires establishing both conceptual and idiomatic equivalence. Words must not only match in definition, they must carry the same cultural weight. When Pepsi exported its Come Alive campaign to China, a literal translation produced a message stating that Pepsi brings your ancestors from the grave. Direct literal translation strips away cultural context. In a survey, this ruins data validity by asking foreign respondents a conceptually different question than the original instrument intended. To prevent this, researchers use back translation. The document is translated into the target language by a local expert, then back into English by a separate bilinguist. Comparing the final text against the original isolates vocabulary anomalies and corrects idiomatic errors. Without strict cross-cultural instrumentation protocols, comparing global datasets is a mathematically invalid exercise. Once the internal mechanics are repaired, overlapping categories fixed, double negatives removed, and cultural equivalence matched, the instrument is structurally sound. The final independent variable is the medium of administration. Researchers must weigh 3 primary distribution modes: electronic, mail, and personal, against the constraints of cost, respondent anonymity, and geographic reach. While electronic surveys offer global reach at near zero marginal cost, they carry a severe limitation: non-response bias. In electronic distribution, a 30% response rate is considered exceptional. That leaves a massive statistical blind spot regarding the 70% of the population that chose to ignore the survey. This highlights the inherent limitation of all questionnaires, regardless of how flawlessly they are engineered. They rely entirely on subjective self-reporting. To counter this, researchers employ multi-method triangulation. Quantitative surveys require pairing with alternative, distinct data collection methods to verify their findings. Direct observational data, studying how subjects actually behave in an environment, serves as an objective cross-verification for their self-reported behavioral claims. To refine broader survey trends, researchers use the Delphi technique, feeding data through iterative panels of experts to challenge and refine predictions until a consensus is reached. When data from surveys, from direct observation, and personal interviews correlate, the researcher gains a much stronger conviction in the accuracy and integrity of their findings. A perfectly engineered questionnaire minimizes internal bias, but rigorous research demands viewing the problem through multiple overlapping lenses of inquiry.